Sophie clutched the pendant hanging from her neck, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "It hasn't changed," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jason offered a warm smile. "Neither have my feelings for you." They walked together toward the old oak tree, its sturdy branches still bearing the remains of the swing they had played on as children. Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's breath hitched as he opened it, revealing a delicate bracelet with a sapphire charm, perfectly matching the pendant she wore. "I wanted to give you something new," Jason began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Something that represents who we are now. Not just the memories of our past, but the future I want to create with you." Sophie's hands shook as she reached for the bracelet, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Jason," she managed, her voice breaking. Jason gently took her hands in his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I love you, Sophie," he said firmly. "Not because you were Sarah, but because of who you are today. Everything you've endured, everything you've become, you are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Sophie's tears flowed freely, her heart overwhelmed by emotions she had long suppressed. Jason inhaled deeply, his tone softening. "I know I've made mistakes," he admitted. "And I know this won't be easy. But if you're willing, I want to build a life with you. A life where we don't have to run from the past anymore." The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze as Sophie looked down at their joined hands, her thoughts racing. When her eyes met Jason's again, the fear, doubt, and hesitation she had carried melted away. "Okay," she whispered, her voice steady even through the tears. "Let's build that life together." Jason's face lit up with a radiant smile, relief and joy washing over him. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart pounding with certainty that he would never let her go again. Texa. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and Jason worked to rebuild their lives, not as remnants of the past, but as equals in the present. They shared their story with friends and colleagues, using it as the foundation for a new mission, establishing an organization to assist the homeless and those struggling to find their way. Sophie took on an active role, collaborating with shelters and outreach programs. Her experiences gave her a deep understanding and allowed her to connect with others in ways that inspired change. Jason supported her every step of the way, his admiration for her growing with each passing day. On the first anniversary of their reunion, Jason brought Sophie back to the oak tree. The meadow was alive with the laughter of children from the shelter they had created, their joy a testament to the lives they had touched. Sitting together beneath the tree's branches, Sophie leaned her head on Jason's shoulder, a contented smile gracing her face. "Thank you," she said softly. Jason looked at her with mock puzzlement. "For what?" "For never giving up on me," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. Jason pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, his heart brimming with love. "I should be thanking you," he murmured, "for giving me a second chance to love you." As the sun sank below the horizon, casting the meadow in golden and amber hues, they sat together, knowing they had discovered something far greater than what they had lost. They had found each other, and this time, they would never let go. Sakua! Jason and Sophie's journey became a testament to the power of second chances, the resilience to overcome life's challenges, and the beauty of rediscovering love in its purest form. Love is not about perfection. It's about embracing each other's flaws and creating something extraordinary together. Flynn would make any sacrifice to prove his devotion to Ivory, especially after her bankruptcy left her in financial ruin. As she spiraled into a state of economic despair, her haggard appearance only deepened Flynn's heartbreak. Consumed with guilt over his inability to help her, Flynn became a shadow of himself. He could barely focus in class, constantly distracted or glued to his phone, desperately searching for ways to make money quickly. In stark contrast, my life had taken a different turn. Before I won the lottery, my financial situation had been even worse than Ivory's. Every day was a balancing act, studying rigorously while working part-time jobs just to scrape by. After winning the lottery for the first time, I could focus solely on my studies without worrying about my next meal or rent. Flynn, always ranked first in our class, had been my academic rival, with me consistently coming in second. While most assumed this was because of my intellect, I knew the truth. Had I not spent so much time juggling jobs, I could have easily claimed the top spot. And now, with my financial worries behind me, I was determined to reclaim that title. Amid Flynn's growing anxiety over money, an opportunity arose. The school reinstated its poverty alleviation fund, offering a generous 10,000 yuan prize. However, there was only one spot per class, and 3 of us were competing: Ivory, Flynn, and me. When the head teacher announced the news, Ivory's determination was palpable. Flynn's eyes lit up, and he immediately turned to her, saying with eager civility, "Ivory, I don't want the quota. You can have the money." Ivory's face lit up with a bright smile, and Flynn, momentarily stunned, stared at her with even greater adoration in his eyes. I lifted my head from a mountain of test papers and scoffed, "I haven't given up yet. Why should she get it?" Flynn turned to me with a look of reproach and dissatisfaction, but I only sneered. In the past, this quota was always contested between Flynn and me. Every time, I had let him have it, not because I wasn't capable of winning, but because I chose to step aside. While Flynn had excellent grades, he was arrogant and selfish, not well liked among our classmates. In terms of votes, I could easily beat him. Ivory, despite her charm, didn't stand much chance either. Before her bankruptcy, she had been aloof and dismissive of her peers. Afterward, apart from her sycophants, few people sympathized with her plight. Unless I withdrew from the race, the quota was as good as mine. Ivory, recognizing this, let a few tears fall, her voice laced with bitterness. "Violet, I've gone bankrupt. Why can't you let me have this? Don't be so selfish." Her words revealed the true Ivory, someone who thrived on playing the victim, weaponizing guilt to manipulate others. In my previous life, she had done the same, even after hitting and killing me in her excitement after getting the money. In court, she had the audacity to say, "It's her fault." If she hadn't been wandering in the middle of the night, I wouldn't have panicked and lost control of the car. She brought this on herself. Her brazen hypocrisy chilled me. Just as I was about to respond, a calm yet cutting voice interrupted. "This is moral blackmail, isn't it?" Everyone's struggling. "Why should we have to give in to you?" I turned toward the speaker, shocked to see Chang Liang, the school's heartthrob and notorious rebel, standing up for me. It was well known that his father was a wealthy jeweler and that Ivory had transferred to our school just to get closer to him. Despite sitting next to her for half a year, Chang Liang had never given her the time of day. And now he was publicly humiliating her on my behalf. Ivory's face flushed with a mix of blue and white as her anger twisted her features. Her eyes brimmed with hatred as she glared at me, jealousy radiating from her like fire. Chang Liang's words had broken the spell she held over our classmates. The crowd quickly turned against her, expressing their refusal to vote for her. In desperation, Ivory turned her pleading gaze toward Flynn, who immediately pulled me aside, his tone gentle but desperate. "Violet, could you let Ivory have the quota? This is really important to me. You'll help me, won't you?" His face was filled with anxiety while Ivory stood at a distance, watching intently for my reaction. Both Flynn and I knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about the money. It was a test. If Flynn could persuade me to withdraw, his standing in Ivory's eyes would rise, and she would begin to trust and rely on him. But if he failed, she would see him as weak and unworthy, and his secret love for her would be over. Flynn was visibly nervous, swallowing hard as he waited for my answer. I pretended to hesitate, feigning distress while laughter bubbled inside me. I never expected that with such little effort I could turn his world upside down. Flynn's absurd behavior was almost entertaining. It was laughable to think I'd truly compete with Ivory for the funding. After all, I was the one who had orchestrated the Poverty Alleviation Fund. Having benefited from the school's assistance for years, it only felt right to give back now that I'd won the lottery. But my ultimate plan wasn't just to return the favor. I wanted Ivory to see Flynn's worth. Once she realized Flynn could be useful, she'd latch onto him like a leech, draining him dry. Flynn, blinded by his love, would hand over everything, and Ivory would mercilessly exploit him. I didn't need to get my hands dirty to ruin Flynn. Watching his first love tear him apart was the perfect retribution, one that would torment him for a lifetime. When I promised to give up the funding spot, Flynn couldn't contain his excitement. Trying to impress Ivory, he eagerly told her the news. For the first time, Ivory smiled sweetly at him, her eyes curving into charming crescents as she threw herself into his arms. "Brother Flynn, you're amazing," she cooed, blinking up at him. Flynn's face turned red, and he nervously fidgeted with his hands, utterly smitten by her praise. I returned to my desk, ignoring the scene, until Chang Liang sauntered over and placed his hands on my desk, a teasing grin on his face. "I thought you'd wised up," he said mockingly, "but you're still wasting your energy on someone who doesn't care about you." I busied myself with my test papers, refusing to respond. Undeterred, Chang Liang pulled a chair beside me, sitting down with a casual air. "Look, Flynn's nothing like you," he continued with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Being hung up on him won't get you anywhere. Why not fall for me instead? I'm single, you know." I lowered my eyes, unwilling to engage. Just then, Flynn returned, still basking in the glow of Ivory's attention. Chang Liang turned to him and declared they were switching seats so he could sit closer to Ivory. Flynn hesitated, glancing at me as though seeking my opinion. His gaze, however, quickly drifted toward Ivory. I nodded, masking my satisfaction. It was exactly what I wanted. Once Flynn became Ivory's deskmate, I wouldn't need to do a thing. Ivory would soon recognize how useful Flynn could be and start pulling his strings. Sure enough, things unfolded just as I had anticipated. Ivory immediately began ordering Flynn around. She loved snacks and constantly sent him on errands, even during class. Whether it meant skipping lessons or climbing over the school wall, Flynn would oblige her every demand. Ivory also loved to indulge in nightlife, dragging Flynn to internet cafes and seedy hangouts. Under the neon lights, she'd sway her hips and share cigarettes with Flynn, passing him a puff through stolen kisses. It didn't take long for Flynn, once a model student, to spiral into a delinquent. His transformation was so rapid that he became someone the other students avoided. After disappearing for 2 days, Flynn reappeared with his school uniform disheveled, 2 buttons undone, and provocative phrases scrawled across his exposed collarbone. The head teacher, who had always held Flynn in high regard, lost his temper, berating him in front of the class. Flynn leaned lazily against the doorframe, looking on the verge of falling asleep. But it wasn't an act. He was genuinely exhausted. Ivory had no money of her own after going bankrupt, so Flynn had taken on multiple part-time jobs to fund her extravagant habits. The teacher, finally exasperated, waved him off in disappointment and sent him back to his seat. As Flynn returned, I couldn't resist a sarcastic comment. "You looked so handsome getting scolded by the teacher," I said with a mocking smile. Despite his weariness, Flynn managed a satisfied grin, taking my words as a compliment. The head teacher soon changed the mood in the classroom by announcing that I had won the gold medal in the physics competition. The room erupted with cheers. As everyone knew, the competition was notoriously difficult, but carried immense prestige. Winning meant early admission to top universities, practically guaranteeing a spot at a prestigious institution. The teacher looked at me with approval. "You should start thinking about which university you want to attend," he said. "With your grades, you can choose between Tsinghua and Peking University." The class buzzed with congratulatory chatter. Flynn, who had been dozing off, scratched his ear irritably and muttered, "It's just early admission." Is it really that big of a deal? I can still get into Tsinghua or Peking University through the college entrance exams. The room quieted slightly. No one doubted Flynn's abilities. Despite his recent decline, his foundation of 3 years as the top student still gave him a strong edge. Flynn then turned to Ivory, slinging his arm around her shoulder and declaring, "Ivory, which school do you like? That's the one I'll choose." Ivory's eyes curved into a satisfied smile as she basked in his attention. I curled my lips, though no hint of amusement reached my eyes. "Choose any school?" "Number." I would ensure Flynn had no school to pick from in this lifetime. After class, Chang Liang unexpectedly offered to treat me to a celebratory meal for earning guaranteed admission. I smiled and teased. I'm the one who got the guaranteed admission. Why are you treating me? Chang Liang met my gaze and replied frankly, because I'm even happier that you succeeded. Who wouldn't want to see someone they like achieve great things? He leaned closer, his expression turning playful. Dress up nicely later, there might be a surprise. I nodded with a polite smile and he affectionately ruffled my hair before leaving. The moment he disappeared from view, my smile froze, bit by bit. My nails dug into my palms, turning my fingertips white. No one else knew the truth about Chang Liang. Behind his charming facade, he was a complete psychopath. In my past life, on the night Ivory hit and killed me with her car, I had been escaping from the cage Chang Liang had meticulously constructed for me. By then, it was the third night of enduring his torment. I had witnessed him cruelly torture over a dozen cats to death, his laughter echoing as he tilted my chin and taunted me. You're the first person I've ever been interested in. It's a shame you're always hovering around Flynn, making it hard for me to act. Impatience had fueled his cruelty, and he found pleasure in hearing my gasps, like a dying animal, and seeing terror reflected in my eyes. Whether it was on or off the bed, his viciousness knew no bounds. Those harrowing memories surged through my mind like waves until they were interrupted by Ivory's sharp, jealous voice. How did you seduce him? I thought you were all about studying, but it turns out you've been learning shady tricks in secret to steal men. Turning, I saw Ivory's face twisted with jealousy. She was the key to bringing down Chang Liang. I put on a smug expression, deliberately leaning closer. Wouldn't you like to know? I said lightly. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Does he really like that? She asked, doubt creeping into her tone. Feigning nonchalance, I shrugged. Why else would he choose me and not you? My words struck a nerve. Ivory, with her inflated ego, had always believed herself superior to everyone else. Smiling brightly, I added, he even told me he plans to propose tonight. By tomorrow, I'll be a wealthy lady. Returning to a life of luxury was Ivory's dream. Her jealousy flared brighter as she processed my words. I think it's true, I continued, pretending to be worried. His family is so traditional. Once he starts a relationship with someone, he has to marry them. Since he's decided to be with me tonight, he'll definitely make it official. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her gaze flicker with a new idea. Ivory's mind was already scheming, her jealousy driving her to take my place. When and where are you meeting him? She asked, trying to sound casual. I almost laughed at how predictable she was. Pretending to be clueless, I shared every detail, even when she slipped sleeping pills into my drink. Acting as though I hadn't noticed, I let myself fall asleep. Triumphantly, Ivory applied heavy makeup, donned a mask, and wore my clothes before sneaking out. Before leaving, she sneered at me disdainfully. What an idiot! You deserve this. By the time anyone realizes I'm not you, it'll be too late. He'll have no choice but to marry me. Once she was gone, I opened my eyes and made a call to an ace entertainment reporter. I have a tip, I began calmly. The only son of a jewelry tycoon is a sexual predator. Tonight, after midnight. The reporter's voice trembled with excitement on the other end. What are your terms? He asked eagerly. This was groundbreaking news. I stared into the void, recalling the grotesque scenes of those cats being dismembered and Chang Liang's arrogant dismissal. Abusing cats isn't illegal, he'd sneered. Who can stop me? My voice was soft but firm. Make it big. I want him ruined. The reporter responded solemnly. I'll make it my top priority. That night, the scandal broke. News of Chang Liang's sadistic nature and predatory behavior spread like wildfire. Whispers echoed through the streets. He looks like a heartthrob on the outside, but he's a monster underneath. So disgusting. Did you hear? They found preserved cat corpses in his house. He's a complete psycho. Ivory's night didn't end well either. People murmured about how she had been carried out crying, several ribs fractured in the chaos. Don't feel bad for her, someone scoffed. She willingly threw herself at Chang Liang. She got what she deserved. Exactly, pity her and you might end up like her. But despite everything, Ivory still had Flynn's unwavering loyalty. "Why doesn't Flynn leave her?" someone else questioned, baffled. "He's pathetic." I glanced at Flynn's empty desk and smirked. The more Ivory needed him, the less likely Flynn was to leave her. To him, adversity only deepened love. That belief had cost me dearly in my past life. After Ivory killed me and faced potential jail time, Flynn had immediately defended her, desperate to stand by her side and prove their love was unshakable. Right now, he was probably at the hospital worrying over her medical bills. Chang Liang had been brutal. Ivory's injuries were undoubtedly severe. And with Chang Liang imprisoned, the jewelry tycoon wouldn't spend a cent to help her. Flynn wished Ivory would just fade away in the hospital, but right now she only had him. She clung to him like a drowning person to a life raft, dragging him deeper into the abyss. Flynn, who had been absent from class for an entire week, finally returned. The first thing he did was approach me, desperation evident in his voice. "Violet, we've been friends since childhood. Could you help me out by taking a loan of 1 million yuan for Ivory's medical bills?" Flynn's pleading gaze even carried a trace of affection. "It's just 1 million yuan. I'll pay you back. You're the only one who can help." His voice was sorrowful, but his request disgusted me. The audacity to assume a few soft words could convince me to shoulder a massive debt for his first love's hospital bills was infuriating. From my past life to now, Flynn had always been selfish. Luckily, I was prepared for this. Sighing, I replied, "I asked the bank, but they said I don't qualify for a loan." "Your house is in your name. Why don't you try mortgaging it instead?" Flynn's eyes darted nervously, betraying his reluctance. Inside, I sneered. Flynn wouldn't dare touch his family's house. His mother, Autumn, cherished it above all else. If she found out, I'd likely face her wrath. Besides, the house was Flynn's only asset, and he wouldn't part with it. While he might appear devoted, Flynn ultimately loved himself the most. Feigning sympathy, I handed him a brochure for a junior college and suggested, "If a top student applies here, they'll receive a 1 million yuan reward." Flynn stared at the pamphlet, torn between eagerness and hesitation. I added with mock understanding, "Forget it. Sacrificing your future for love is something that only happens in novels. Ordinary people like us don't have such grand romances." Predictably, Flynn snatched the brochure from my hand and scoffed. "You underestimate my love for her. What's a future compared to being with her? I can do anything for Ivory. Besides, who needs the college entrance examination? I'll succeed without it." With that, Flynn stormed off and a smile crept onto my face. I knew him too well. Flynn didn't truly love Ivory. He loved the act of self-sacrifice. He relished the satisfaction of throwing himself into love. With just a little push, he abandoned his ambitions without hesitation. His disdain for the mundane routine of exams made him favor the flashy and undisciplined Ivory. But soon enough, he'd learn how unforgiving life could be without the foundation provided by the entrance examination. The next day, Flynn announced his decision to enroll in the junior college. The head teacher, livid, scolded him for being short-sighted. Other teachers also tried to dissuade him, taking turns to plead with him. "Flynn, don't be impulsive. The school can find a way to manage the medical expenses. Don't throw your future away. You've studied for 12 years to pass the college entrance exam and enter a top university. How can you give up so easily? If you aim for Tsinghua University, the scholarship money alone will cover the bills. Ivory can wait a little longer." Despite their reasoning, Flynn grew increasingly irritable. The more they pushed, the more determined he became to frame himself as a pure love warrior, sacrificing everything for love. Flynn returned to the classroom with Ivory clinging to him, her frail figure nestled against his chest. She looked pale and weak, clearly determined to keep him tethered to her. Glaring at the teachers with disdain, she spoke sarcastically, "Brother Flynn, listen to them. Go ahead and abandon me. If you choose the junior college, they'll lose their bonuses and rewards." Flynn's expression immediately darkened. "I've had enough," he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "You're all so selfish, only thinking about yourselves and not about how I feel. I love Ivory, and I'm willing to give up my future for her. The college entrance exam is meaningless compared to her. The teachers stared at him as though he were a stranger. Disappointment etched across their faces, the head teacher's gaze turned icy. I stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Teacher," I whispered, "there's no point in trying to convince someone blinded by love." The head teacher gripped my hand tightly, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Violet, don't make the same mistakes he is," she said sorrowfully. I nodded solemnly, and she patted my head with a resigned smile before signalling for the other teachers to leave. As they exited, Ivory smirked victoriously. "Finally!" she muttered under her breath, basking in her perceived triumph. But her moment of glory was short-lived. A cold laugh echoed from the doorway. "You've passed the teacher's test, but you'll never pass mine," came a stern voice. Startled, Flynn looked toward the door as his mother, Autumn, entered. She strode toward me with determined steps, taking my hand in hers. "Violet, I'm sorry for being late," Autumn said warmly. "Don't worry. I've always wanted you as my daughter-in-law. Your mother was my best friend, and I care about you as much as she did. I won't let anyone bully you." Ivory's smug expression faltered. She hadn't expected another obstacle after overcoming the teachers. Worse, Flynn's resolve wavered under Autumn's disapproving glare. When Autumn mentioned her suspicions about my lottery win, Flynn's face grew pale. "You're lying," she accused. "If you really won, why would you ask my son to trade his future for money?" The room fell silent, but the air was heavy with tension. Ivory sneered smugly. "I was just testing your son to see if he'd be willing to sacrifice for me. If he was, I'd share the 200 million with him." The greed that flickered in Autumn's eyes upon hearing about the money was impossible to miss. Ivory's tone grew sharper. "But who asked you to have such a foolish mother, forcing me to reveal the truth now? Fine, as you wish. I'll let your son take the Tsinghua University entrance exam, but he won't see a single cent of this 200 million. With that, she conjured tears and cried dramatically to Flynn, "Brother Flynn, I wanted to attend the same school as you, but I'm too selfish. I've ruined your future." Flynn immediately shook his head, his voice full of conviction. "No, you wanted to go to the same university as me, and we will. I've already decided to enroll in that junior college. We'll still be together." Ivory sobbed even harder, turning to Autumn with trembling lips. "But your mother won't allow it. Without her approval, we'll never be happy. I'm sorry, but we'll have to break up." Faced with the choice between Tsinghua University and 200 million, Autumn didn't hesitate. Plastering a fake smile on her face, she said obsequiously, "I agree. Why wouldn't I? In fact, I brought Violet's mother here today to help her understand that her daughter simply can't compete with you." My mother's face fell in disbelief, her trust shattered by Autumn's betrayal. Autumn turned to my mother, her voice impatient. "Look at her. She has 200 million yuan. Violet can't even afford tuition. What's the comparison here? You should leave my son alone." Furious, my mother trembled as I gently reassured her. "If you dislike us so much, you should move out of our house immediately." Both our families owned homes, but Autumn had exploited my mother's kind heart to move into ours, renting out her own property to live comfortably. "Move out, I will," Autumn scoffed dismissively. "My future daughter-in-law has 200 million yuan. What's a house compared to that?" She then turned back to Ivory, coaxing her with relentless desperation. Finally, Ivory relented and agreed to stay with Flynn. That same day, Flynn signed an agreement with the junior college, securing 1 million yuan in funding. However, if he failed to score above Tsinghua University's cutoff in the college entrance exam or broke the agreement, he'd face a 10 million yuan penalty. With the money in hand, Flynn and Ivory embraced, their faces glowing with triumph. The head teacher, clearly disheartened, coldly dismissed them. Undeterred, the two walked out hand in hand, parading their so-called victory around campus. Using part of the 1 million yuan, Ivory paid off her medical bills and swiftly returned to her former lifestyle. She spent her days indulging in luxury, hopping between nightclubs and extravagant outings. Meanwhile, Flynn became a self-proclaimed pure love warrior, proudly flaunting his relationship with Ivory as though it were a badge of honor. The satisfaction Flynn gained from his self-sacrificial love only lasted until the joint examination in the second semester of senior year. Once the results were posted, Flynn plummeted from first place in the grade to 10th, while I claimed the top spot. The exam, modelled after the college entrance exam, was a wake-up call. Flynn's total score fell below Tsinghua University's admission line from the previous year. Almost immediately, the junior college sent him a warning. If his college entrance exam score didn't surpass the cutoff, he'd owe them 10 million yen in penalties. For the first time, panic set in. Starting his adult life burdened with a 10 million yuan debt wasn't something Flynn could stomach. Determined to avoid disaster, he threw himself back into studying. However, when he tried to reintegrate into the academic environment, he realized he'd been left behind. Why wasn't I told about the weekend makeup lessons? Flynn stormed into the office, his frustrations spilling over. He confronted the head teacher, his tone dripping with dissatisfaction. Since signing the junior college agreement, the head teacher had completely given up on Flynn. Without missing a beat, she responded with icy detachment. The school doesn't waste resources on students bound for junior colleges. Flynn's face turned dark, but he had no argument. I have talent. I don't need extra lessons to catch up, he declared stubbornly. Normal classes are enough for me. Resolving to prove himself, Flynn abandoned his habit of skipping class and attended every lesson without fail. But less than a week later, the cracks began to show. He struggled to keep up with the intense atmosphere of the classroom, where everyone else was anxiously preparing for the college entrance exam, each striving for a coveted spot at a prestigious university. Flynn, on the other hand, faced a starkly different reality. No matter how well he performed, his path led only to a junior college, a destination that couldn't compare. Flynn's classmates barely acknowledged him anymore, and his teachers completely ignored his questions. It was as if he had lost the very essence of fitting in, like an ordinary duck trying to blend in with a group of swans. When Flynn had first signed the junior college agreement, his peers praised him as a pure love warrior, but now he was the subject of mockery and ridicule. Day by day, Flynn's frustration grew, but his irritation reached its peak after realizing his predicament. Having burned through all the money and still unsatisfied, Flynn approached Ivory in the classroom. "Ivory," he pleaded, "help me pay the penalty so I can go to Tsinghua University with you, okay?" Flynn had always believed it didn't matter where he studied as long as they were together, but now he finally understood how wrong he had been. Caught off guard, Ivory hesitated and replied evasively, "Paying the penalty won't help. My grades aren't good enough to get into Tsinghua University anyway." Flynn quickly offered to teach her. "I can help you study," he said eagerly. Ivory, however, smirked and retorted, "You might want to teach, but I don't want to learn. If you can get me into Tsinghua University without studying, then I'll pay your penalty." Ivory thought this would put an end to Flynn's persistence, but she didn't notice the spark of determination in his eyes. After class, Flynn approached my desk, flashing the same friendly smile he used to wear and speaking warmly. "Violet, congratulations on being the top scorer. It feels like it's been ages since we last talked." His tone was casual, but his true intentions soon surfaced as he asked, "So, which university did you choose for your guaranteed admission?" I tightened my grip on my pen, my mind seething. Flynn's schemes were all too familiar. In my previous life, he had stolen my guaranteed admission to benefit Ivory. This time, it was my turn to settle the score. "Tsinghua University," I said calmly, watching as greed flashed across Flynn's face. He licked his lips and asked, "That's an amazing choice, Violet. Can I take a look at your early admission letter?" An early admission letter is an official agreement from a top university for outstanding students. Once signed and returned, it guarantees formal admission. Flynn was skilled at forgery. He could copy the details, swap the photo and personal information, and create a counterfeit letter. In my past life, Flynn had done exactly that to replace my admission with Ivory's. Feigning innocence, I smiled sweetly and handed him the letter. "Sure, take a look." Flynn eagerly absorbed every detail, memorizing the information with a confident grin before tossing it back to me. "Congratulations," he said, though his tone was laced with false pity. He then returned to his seat and whispered to Ivory, outlining his plan to switch her information with mine so she could attend Tsinghua University. Ivory let out an excited squeal. "Brother Flynn, is that true? You're amazing!" Puffing out his chest with pride, Flynn declared, "Of course! Just wait, you'll be attending Tsinghua University with me." Ivory threw her arms around Flynn, thrilled by the prospect of going to a prestigious university. Though she had no interest in studying, the status of being a Tsinghua student was irresistible. "When the admission letter comes, you'll pay my penalty, right? Then we'll go together," she said. Ivory's evasive tone hinted at her secret. She hadn't won the lottery after all. But Flynn, blinded by his own self-assurance, didn't notice. Smiling smugly, he opened his book and hummed a cheerful tune. Watching Flynn from my seat, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. He thought I was as naive as I'd been in my previous life. Little did he know, he was walking straight into the trap I'd carefully laid for him. Flynn forged Ivory's details and replaced my information in the admission documents before submitting them. When the notice was sent out, Flynn and Ivory couldn't contain their glee. My classmates congratulated me, confident I'd have a bright future. I chuckled and replied cryptically, "Don't celebrate too early. You never know who'll be admitted in the end." One classmate, speaking on my behalf, scoffed at Ivory. "It definitely won't be you. You're dead last in the grade. Go play house with Flynn. What does the college entrance exam have to do with either of you?" Others joined in, mocking Ivory for her arrogance. Unable to bear the ridicule, Ivory snapped, her voice dripping with pride. "Mark my words, I'll be the one admitted to Tsinghua University." Having sent out the forged documents, Ivory stopped hiding her plans. She boasted to everyone she encountered that she'd already secured early admission and would soon receive her acceptance letter. While most classmates ignored her, her certainty sowed seeds of doubt, and some warned me to be cautious of potential fraud. Cases like this had occurred before, but the consequences were severe: expulsion at best, and criminal charges at worst. While most people would never dare to take such a risk, no one could rule out Ivory's recklessness. As soon as the early admission notices arrived, I was prepared for what would unfold. Ivory and Flynn eagerly arrived at the classroom early, their anticipation palpable. The head teacher entered holding the admission notices, and Ivory's gaze was fixed intently on her, as though she could pierce the envelope with her eyes. Flynn, ever the supportive accomplice, gently squeezed her hand. "Don't worry," he assured her. "The name on that notice will be yours." The head teacher raised her hand holding 2 notices, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "I have 2 guaranteed admission notices here," she began, her tone cold. "The first one is for Ivory, to Tsinghua University." Ivory let out a jubilant scream, her excitement evident. Flynn, however, grew visibly tense. His unease was justified when the head teacher continued. "The second notice is for Violet, to Peking University." The colour drained from Flynn's face as Ivory continued celebrating, oblivious. But her cheers were cut short when the head teacher added sternly, "Tsinghua University has informed us that Violet declined their admission offer, but someone impersonated her using her personal information. This serious fraud has had a significant negative impact, and they expect us to address it immediately." Ivory's celebratory expression froze. She turned to Flynn, her brows furrowed in confusion. "What's going on? Didn't you say it was foolproof?" Flynn turned his furious gaze toward me, his tone venomous. "Violet, you set me up." I smiled calmly. "I simply went along with your plan." Flynn's perfect scheme had one critical flaw. I never chose Tsinghua University. When Flynn asked which school I had selected, I intentionally misled him, knowing he would use that information to forge documents. My actual choice was Peking University. Everything Flynn had orchestrated was based on a lie I fed him. The head teacher's voice rang with finality, like a judge delivering a sentence. "Flynn and Ivory, you are guilty of forging documents and attempting fraud. Both of you are expelled, and your college entrance exam qualifications are revoked." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Flynn's face turned ashen while Ivory quickly began protesting. Why should I be punished? This was all Flynn's idea. I didn't do anything. Flynn stared at her, shocked by her betrayal. "Ivory, how can you say that?" he stammered. But Ivory doubled down, angrily demanding that Flynn admit it was entirely his doing. The head teacher watched her with disdain while I added, "So, Flynn, how does that pure love taste now?" Flynn's face flushed with shame, but he still took full responsibility, packing his belongings to leave. He had no idea his troubles were just beginning. Before he could leave, a teacher from the junior college that had given him a 1 million yuan advance arrived. His expression was stern, his tone unforgiving. "You owe us 10 million yuan in liquidated damages. Pay it, or you'll be spending a long time in prison." The word prison drained the last traces of defiance from Flynn. He begged, "Please give me more time. My girlfriend has 200 million yuan from the lottery. She can cover it." He rushed to find Ivory, but I intercepted them, catching her in the act of stealing my Hermes bag. Ivory clung to the bag, adamantly denying her theft. "This bag is mine. I used to be a wealthy lady. How could you, a poor student, afford a Hermes bag?" Some bystanders hesitated, siding with Ivory. After all, it seemed plausible that a former rich girl would own such a bag, while I, a struggling student, might not. Ivory's confidence grew, her grip on the bag tightening. But I had had enough. Clearing my throat, I prepared to reveal the truth. Before I could, Flynn appeared out of nowhere, slapping me across the face. Pain exploded as stars danced in my vision, and I stumbled, nearly falling. "Violet, you set me up, and now you're slandering Ivory!" Flynn shouted, his voice filled with fury. "I'll kill you!" Blood trickled from my lip as classmates rushed to help me. The commotion escalated, and someone ran to call a teacher. Flynn immediately turned his attention back to Ivory, clinging to her desperately. "Ivory, the junior college teacher, is demanding 10 million yen. If I don't pay, I'll go to prison. Please, you have to help me." Ivory, however, pulled away, her disgust evident. "Why would I give you money?" she scoffed. Flynn's voice rose, desperate and angry. "I borrowed that money for you. I took the blame and got expelled for you. I've sacrificed everything for you, and you won't even help me?" Ivory's expression hardened. "Help you? Don't flatter yourself. Do you think I'd waste 10 million on someone like you? I only kept you around because you were useful. Now that you're not, you're worthless to me." Flynn's world shattered as Ivory's true colours emerged. "But you said you won 200 million, he cried. "Where's the money?" Ivory sneered. "Do you think I'd be here if I had that kind of money? You're an idiot, Flynn." Flynn, left without options, was consumed by despair. Ivory, unmasked as a fraud, had no more use for him, leaving him to face the consequences of his own choices alone. Flynn's obsession with Ivory had been the talk of the school, but now it had taken a turn. Sympathy for Flynn ran high as classmates urged Ivory to help him financially. Ivory, however, looked cornered and embarrassed. Just then, the principal and several teachers arrived. The principal hurried to check on me, then addressed the group sternly. "Who said Violet couldn't afford a Hermes bag? She donated 10 million yuan for the school's last funding drive." The revelation left everyone stunned. Ivory, refusing to accept it, exclaimed, "How could she possibly have 10 million yuan? The principal smirked and laid bare the truth. "Because Violet won a 200 million yuan lottery, unlike you, who only knows how to lie." Ivory's face turned pale as panic washed over her, and Flynn looked at me in utter disbelief, his regret plainly visible. Fed up with the disruption Ivory had caused, the principal seized the moment to restore order. "Ivory has violated school rules by stealing and will be expelled immediately," he announced. Ivory's protests grew louder, but this time, no one gave her any attention. Even Flynn seemed disinterested, his gaze now fixated on me. With heavy steps, Flynn approached, his face a mixture of desperation and guilt. "Violet, I'm sorry," he muttered. Applying an ice pack to my swollen cheek, I responded icily, "Apologies won't suffice. You owe me compensation for my medical expenses, and I'll also be suing you for assault." Flynn's face twisted in frustration. "Didn't you like me?" he asked impatiently. "If you pay the 10 million yuan, I'll stay with you. Isn't that enough?" His arrogant assumption left me laughing out of sheer disbelief. "What do you think you are?" I sneered. "You're just a man about to go to jail." "Why would I want you?" Flynn's expression turned sour as he stammered. "You did like me. Don't deny it." His pride disgusted me even more. So he had known all along how I felt about him. He had used my feelings to build a dream life for Ivory, stealing my lottery ticket, forging a suicide note to frame me, and replacing my guaranteed admission, all while knowing I cared for him. That realization erased any lingering affection I might have felt. You owe 10 million yuan, plus my medical and emotional damages, I said coldly. Get ready to spend the rest of your life behind bars. Flynn fell to his knees pleading for mercy, but it was futile. In the past life, he had shielded a murderer. In this one, he would rot in jail. With Flynn gone, it was Ivory's turn to face the consequences. Being expelled was a small price to pay for someone who had once taken a life. But I had something far worse planned for her, a punishment that would make her wish for an end. After winning the 200 million yuan, I had taken up investing and entered the jewelry business, determined to make the money grow and use it to fight people like the jewelry tycoon Chang Yang's father. Just like his son's sadistic tendencies, Chang Yang's father had a dark side. He exploited vulnerable students under the guise of financial aid, only to torment them mentally and physically later. In my previous life, one of his victims, a girl who had confided in me, died in an accident. That girl's story had driven me to the brink of despair then, but now I had a chance to change the narrative. With a growing fortune, I gradually took over the jewelry tycoon's business and gathered evidence of his crimes. When I had enough, I sent him to prison. After that, I ensured Chang Yang, who had been released, was sent to a mental institution. Ivory was sent there as well. Chang Yang's abusive tendencies had only worsened during his time in prison. In the asylum, with no one else to direct his cruelty toward, his attention turned to Ivory. Her screams echoed daily through the institution. Chang Yang blamed her for his downfall, and now she bore the full brunt of his vengeance. Meanwhile, Flynn's mother, Autumn, lost everything. With Flynn in jail and no financial support, her house was auctioned off to settle debts. She worked tirelessly to make ends meet, often begging my mother for forgiveness. My mom, however, was too busy with her charitable work to give her any attention. She had found joy in preparing gifts and clothes for the students I sponsored. As my philanthropic efforts expanded, I began changing the lives of countless young people. These students, once trapped in despair, now looked at me with hope and gratitude, calling me sister. Their renewed sense of purpose filled me with pride, knowing I had rewritten not just my destiny, but theirs as well. Being reborn was a blessing, not just for me, but for all those who now had a chance at a brighter future.